People often think that opportunity is something you either capture early in life or you miss forever, but that's a myth. One of the most damaging beliefs society keeps repeating because it makes people surrender before they even try. The truth is, there's no such thing as too late unless you're trying to break the speed of light, and even then, physics doesn't allow it, not your age. When you say to yourself, I'm too old, the best years are behind me, what you're really doing is outsourcing your imagination to outdated cultural programming that assumes innovation, achievement, and transformation are only for the young. That's not how reality works. Physics doesn't care about your age. Biology doesn't care about your age. What matters is energy, focus, and the ability to solve problems with creativity and persistence. If you can still think, you can still create. If you can still move, you can still build. The only barrier that actually exists is the one inside your mind that tells you possibilities are over because a number on a calendar flipped past some arbitrary milestone. Think about it this way. When a rocket sits on the launch pad, it doesn't matter how long it has been sitting there. What matters is whether the fuel is ready, whether the engineering checks are complete, and whether there is a mission worth launching. Your life works the same way. You could be 30, 50, 70, it doesn't matter. What matters is whether you are ready to ignite the engines of your potential and push past the gravitational pull of fear and doubt that keeps most people grounded for life. People confuse momentum with destiny. They believe that because they didn't start something in their 20s, they've missed the window. But some of the most meaningful ventures on Earth have been launched by people who carried decades of experience before they attempted their greatest work. Look at Colonel Sanders, who started KFC in his 60s. Look at Vera Wang, who entered fashion design at 40, or look at SpaceX, which failed 3 launches in a row before succeeding. The point isn't the age or the setback. The point is the refusal to interpret the timeline as permanent failure. I can tell you from building companies that age has less to do with outcomes than most people think. What determines success is not youth, but velocity of learning and the willingness to keep trying even when the probability of success looks near zero. That's how rockets fly, that's how electric cars became mainstream, and that's how you create breakthroughs in your own life. The danger of believing in too late is that it paralyzes you into waiting. You wait for a perfect condition which never comes. You wait for energy, which never arrives because energy is generated by action, not the other way around. The longer you wait, the more you tell your brain that waiting is the safest course, and before you know it, years are gone. What you need to realize is that the safest course is often the most dangerous because it guarantees regret. No one regrets trying. People regret the opportunities they let die because they convinced themselves the time was gone. I've seen this with engineers who had brilliant ideas but thought they were too junior or too senior to be taken seriously. Some stayed quiet and watched someone else build what they had imagined. Others took action, and even if they failed, they built skills, resilience, and networks that launched them further than they ever thought possible. The lesson is clear. Time is not a cage, it's raw material. The question is what you do with it. When people tell me, but Elon, you're different, you had resources, you had luck, they miss the point. Tesla was almost bankrupt multiple times. SpaceX nearly failed entirely. At those moments, resources and luck weren't the differentiators. The differentiator was refusing to let a narrative of too late or too hard dictate the decision to keep going. The same principle applies to you. Your resources are your experiences, your perspective, and your ability to act now, not the opportunities you think you missed years ago. Age actually gives you an advantage because it compresses wisdom into a smaller number of mistakes. When you've already lived through decades, you know what matters and what doesn't, what's noise and what's signal. You don't waste time chasing illusions the way younger people often do. You can focus faster, cut through the nonsense, and zero in on what will actually make your life meaningful. In engineering terms, you've reduced error margins through testing. That's not a liability. That's an advantage. Think of yourself as a spacecraft already orbiting the Earth. It doesn't matter how long you've been up there. What matters is when you fire the thrusters for the next maneuver. Even a tiny push can completely alter the trajectory of the orbit over time. That's how orbital mechanics work, and that's how your life works. One decision now can create a completely different future. 10 years from today, you are not behind. You are exactly where you are supposed to be, if you're willing to use everything you've been through as the thrust for what comes next. The myth of too late collapses the moment you realize that the timeline is irrelevant and that progress is nonlinear. Sometimes what looks like decades of delay is actually decades of preparation. Every hardship, every sacrifice, every lesson was fuel. And fuel doesn't expire, it just waits for ignition. The only real question is whether you're willing to stop believing in expiration dates and start believing in launch windows. You haven't missed yours. You've been preparing for it. And it starts the moment you decide to light the engines. Most people undervalue what they already know, but experience is not baggage, it's an asset, and if you understand how to leverage it, it becomes your most powerful competitive edge in any field. When I build companies, I don't just look for people with raw intelligence. I look for people who have been through enough cycles of failure and success to know how to filter reality. Because knowledge without pattern recognition is just trivia. Experience gives you the ability to see patterns, to anticipate failure points before they occur, to avoid wasting time on problems that don't matter and to double down on the ones that do. The younger version of you didn't have that, which means the version of you now is far more prepared to build something sustainable than you were at 25, even if you don't feel like it. Think about how rockets are tested. We don't just fire them once and hope for the best. We test them, fail them, analyze them, and feed that data into the next version. Every failure makes the rocket smarter. Your life has worked the same way. Every setback, every mistake, every detour has been adding intelligence to your personal operating system. So when you tell yourself you're too late, what you're actually ignoring is that you now carry a data set so valuable that people who are younger simply don't have it. They might have energy, but you have data, and data drives the future. People assume innovation is about having a brand new idea, but that's rarely true. Innovation is about recombining existing knowledge in ways that solve problems differently. Your decades of experience have given you thousands of data points about what works and what doesn't. If you put them together with a clear vision, you can create solutions that no 20-year-old could imagine, not because they aren't smart, but because they don't have the raw material of lived experience. Take Tesla, for example. The idea of electric cars wasn't new. The first electric cars existed over a century ago. What made Tesla different was combining existing technologies, batteries, software, design in a way that made them exciting and practical for modern life. That's not invention from zero. That's recombination of experience and data. The same principle applies to you. You don't need to start from nothing. You need to combine what you already know in ways that create value. That's how breakthroughs happen. The problem is most people dismiss their own experience as irrelevant because it doesn't look like what they imagine success skills should be. They think raising a family, managing a household, working a job that wasn't glamorous or high-paying doesn't count. But those experiences taught you logistics, patience, negotiation, resilience, creativity under constraint, leadership, empathy, all skills that billion-dollar companies pay consultants to teach. The difference is that you've lived them in high-stakes, real-world environments where failure wasn't an option. That makes them more valuable, not less. When I interview people, I don't care as much about polished resumes. I care about what they've actually solved. Have they faced impossible problems and figured out a way through? Have they learned how to keep going when the probability of success was low? Because that's what matters in the real world. And you already have that. You just haven't recognized it as capital you can deploy. Here's the important shift. Stop seeing your experiences as stories of survival and start seeing them as case studies in problem solving. Each one contains data, strategies, and lessons that can be applied to new challenges. If you survived raising children, you know how to manage unpredictable systems. If you cared for aging parents, you know how to create stability under pressure. If you worked decades in a job you didn't love but stayed consistent, you know how to maintain discipline and reliability. These are competitive edges because they're rare. Most people quit when things get hard. You didn't. That endurance is leverage. The people who think it's too late for them are the ones who haven't yet understood that their ordinary lives were actually extraordinary training programs preparing them for something bigger. They dismiss what they know because they think the future only belongs to people who can code or raise venture capital. But the future actually belongs to those who can solve human problems, build systems that work, and persist long enough to bring solutions to reality. That's you. The world is full of intelligent people who can't finish what they start, full of energetic people who give up after the first failure, full of creative people who can't stay disciplined long enough to make their ideas real. What makes the difference is experience that has taught you not to flinch when things get messy. That's why I say your greatest advantage is not behind you, it's within you, right now, waiting to be recognized. Imagine applying the same persistence you used to get through your hardest personal challenges into building something meaningful now. Imagine channeling the patience you built over decades into mentoring, leading, or creating. Imagine taking the empathy you developed through relationships and turning it into solutions that actually make people's lives better. That's not a dream. That's a competitive edge stronger than any degree or certificate. The irony is that many people spend their 20s and 30s desperately trying to build the wisdom you already have. They read books about leadership, they attend seminars about resilience, they study case studies about problem solving. You've lived those case studies. You've already done the work. The only missing link is recognizing that your time hasn't passed, it's just becoming valuable. Experience compounds like interest. Every lesson learned, every failure endured, every success achieved adds to the capital you can deploy today. If you start now, you're not starting from zero. You're starting from compounded decades of learning, and compounding is the most powerful force in the universe. That's why experience is not something that slows you down, it's the rocket fuel that can accelerate you if you stop dismissing it. The key is to stop comparing yourself to younger people with different advantages. They have speed, but you have endurance. They have raw energy, but you have refined wisdom. They might sprint faster, but you can navigate the entire course without collapsing. In any serious challenge, that's the edge that wins. So the next time you think your past disqualifies you, remember this. Your past is your most valuable asset. It's the library of solutions, strategies, and strengths that nobody else can copy. Use it, build with it, lead with it, because experience is not the end of possibility. It's the launch pad for everything extraordinary you're still capable of creating. The biggest lie society tells people as they age is that their most important chances have already passed, that innovation belongs to the young, that risk-taking is only for people who still have decades to recover, that building something meaningful requires starting in your 20s or 30s, and if you miss that window, you should settle for stability and comfort until retirement. That narrative is not just false, it's destructive because it convinces millions of people to voluntarily shut down their potential and stop contributing at the very moment when they actually have the most to give. Look at history. Some of the greatest achievements in science, art, and business came from people well beyond the so-called prime years. Colonel Sanders didn't start KFC until his 62nd. Vera Wang designed her first dress at 40. Morgan Freeman didn't get his breakout role until his 52nd. These are not exceptions. They are proof that the idea of being too late is nothing but a cultural myth designed to keep you in line, to stop you from disrupting the system, and to funnel your energy into being a consumer rather than a creator. Think about why that narrative exists. If you believe it's too late for you, then you stop trying. You stop challenging existing structures. You stop asking inconvenient questions. That makes you easy to manage, easy to market to, easy to pacify with entertainment, easy to convince that the best you can do is watch other people live extraordinary lives while you settle for ordinary. But the truth is, the only clock that matters is the one inside you, and as long as you're breathing, your capacity to create, to build, to transform has not expired. The illusion of too late comes from comparing yourself to imaginary timelines. Society says you should graduate at this age, marry at that age, peak in your career at some arbitrary age, and then fade out quietly. But real life doesn't follow linear timelines. Real breakthroughs often come when everything else in your life has prepared you to see what others miss. It's not about age, it's about readiness. And readiness comes from experience, resilience, and perspective qualities that increase with time, not decrease. When I build rockets, I don't care if the first test fails at launch. What matters is whether the engineers use the data to improve the next iteration. The same principle applies to life. Every failure, every delay, every so-called missed opportunity is actually test data. If you're willing to use that data now, you're not late, you're optimized. The illusion of too late also comes from confusing speed with progress. Young people can move fast, but fast doesn't always mean forward. They can launch 10 projects in a year and abandon them all. They can chase trends that disappear in months. What you have is depth, the ability to filter noise from signal, the clarity to focus on what actually matters, the resilience to stay with something long enough to see it through. That's not a disadvantage. That's a competitive advantage disguised as maturity. Imagine applying all your accumulated experience to a single bold project now. The probability of success would be higher, not lower, because you're no longer distracted by proving yourself, no longer wasting time on vanity goals, no longer driven by ego, but by clarity and authenticity. That's when real breakthroughs happen. The other reason people fall into the illusion of too late is because they measure themselves against highlight reels. Social media shows you the 5-year-old who just raised millions in funding, the influencer who just bought a mansion, the entrepreneur who sold a startup for billions. But for every highlight you see, there are thousands of failures you don't see, and the truth is, Many of those who succeed early burn out just as fast because they lack the resilience and wisdom to sustain their success. You have that resilience. You've already survived challenges that would have broken them. You've built systems, endured losses, carried responsibilities, and kept going. That means you're not late. You're seasoned. You're not starting behind. You're starting with armor they don't even know they need yet. Breakthroughs don't belong to the fastest sprinters. They belong to the ones who can endure the marathon. That's you. But here's the key. None of this matters if you keep accepting the illusion of too late. The moment you believe it, you create a self-fulfilling prophecy. You stop trying, you stop experimenting, you stop risking, and then of course nothing changes. That reinforces the belief, and the cycle continues. The way out is to reframe your perspective entirely. Instead of saying, I missed my chance, you ask, what is my chance now, with everything I've learned? Instead of envying someone younger, you ask, what do I know that they don't? Instead of focusing on the years behind you, you focus on the leverage of the years ahead, where you can build faster because you no longer have to learn the basics from scratch. Think about it this way. Rockets don't launch until everything is aligned. The design, the trajectory, the weather conditions, the timing, it all has to come together. Maybe your launch window wasn't at 25. Maybe it's now, because only now do you have the wisdom, the clarity, the focus, and the drive to make the mission work. You are not behind schedule. You are right on time for the mission you were actually built for. Once you see that, the illusion of too late dissolves, and you realize that the best years are not behind you, they're the ones you haven't even started yet. And the only thing standing between you and them is the belief that you're too late. Drop that belief, and the runway opens. One of the most underestimated advantages you have at this stage of life is the sheer leverage of experience. And when I say leverage, I don't just mean knowledge or skills. I mean the compound effect of decades of trial and error, of watching patterns repeat, of seeing how people behave in both crisis and opportunity, of learning what actually works instead of what looks good on paper. Because experience is not just about survival. It is about data, and data interpreted correctly gives you power to make better decisions faster than people who are still guessing their way forward, and that advantage is enormous if you choose to use it. When I build rockets or cars or energy systems, the first iterations are full of mistakes. Every failure costs time and resources, but every failure also produces data, and eventually the data accumulates to a point where the probability of success skyrockets, and that's exactly what your life experience is, accumulated data that younger people simply don't have yet. You've already seen businesses rise and fall, relationships thrive and collapse, technologies emerge and disappear, cultures shift and values evolve, which means when you step into a new project or relationship now, you're not guessing blind, you're leveraging decades of evidence. The key is realizing that experience itself is a form of capital, and unlike money, it cannot be taken from you. It cannot be inflated away. It cannot be lost in a bad investment. It only compounds when you use it. But the tragedy is that most people don't see their experience as leverage. They see it as baggage. They focus on the failures as proof they shouldn't try again. They focus on the mistakes as evidence they're not capable, when in reality those failures are the most valuable intellectual property you own, because they give you shortcuts others will never find. When a young entrepreneur fails, they often collapse emotionally, they take it personally, they assume it means they're not cut out for it. But when you fail now, you already know it doesn't mean the end. It means the next iteration, the next improvement, the next test, and that mindset alone is leverage because it allows you to keep moving when others would quit. Think about the advantage of knowing yourself better now than ever before. In your 20s, you spend energy trying to figure out who you are, what you want, where you belong. You waste years following other people's expectations. You make decisions to impress, to fit in, to compete. But by now, you've learned what energizes you, what drains you, what aligns with your values, and what feels empty. And that clarity eliminates noise, it gives you focus, and focus is leverage. A rocket doesn't reach orbit by burning fuel in every direction. It reaches orbit by channeling all its force in one trajectory. And that's what experience allows you to do, focus your energy on what matters most, instead of scattering it across distractions. Another dimension of leverage is credibility. You may not realize it, but decades of living give you authority that younger people cannot manufacture. When you speak from experience, people listen differently. When you offer insight, it carries weight because it's not theory, it's lived reality. This credibility can open doors in business, in mentorship, in leadership, in community building, but only if you claim it, because too many people silence themselves thinking their voice no longer matters in a culture obsessed with youth, when in fact your voice may be the one thing that cuts through the noise precisely because it carries authenticity. Experience also gives you pattern recognition, the ability to see connections others miss, to anticipate outcomes before they unfold, to identify what's a real opportunity and what's a trap. That's the same skill artificial intelligence systems are trained on massive data sets that allow them to predict results. You already have that training in the form of life experience. The difference is you can add intuition, empathy, creativity, and values to your predictions, which makes your pattern recognition even more powerful than algorithms. This is why many of the most successful entrepreneurs, artists, and leaders hit their stride later in life, because only then do they have enough data to see the bigger picture clearly. Here's the truth. Younger people can work harder, they can move faster, they can experiment recklessly, but you can work smarter, you can move strategically, you can design systems that last because you've seen what collapses. That's leverage, and in any competitive field, leverage wins. But the most important leverage experience gives you is emotional. You've already survived storms. You've lost things you thought you couldn't live without, and kept going. You've faced uncertainty, loss, rejection, failure, and yet here you are, still alive, still breathing, still capable. That resilience means future challenges can't intimidate you the same way. You've already proven you can outlast them. Younger people often fold under pressure because it's their first storm. You've been through enough storms to know that they pass. That calm under pressure is leverage because it lets you make rational decisions when others are panicking, and in those moments, the person who stays calm has all the power. Imagine what happens when you combine this emotional resilience with your accumulated knowledge, your clarity of values, your credibility, your pattern recognition, your focus. That combination makes you unstoppable if you decide to act. The only thing standing in your way is the belief that your experience doesn't matter anymore, and that belief is the most dangerous illusion of all because it turns your greatest asset into a wasted resource. What you need to understand is this. Your experience is not a record of missed opportunities, it's the raw material for your greatest contribution. The leverage of experience is like the thrust of a rocket. For years, you were collecting fuel. Now it's time to ignite it. When you look at people who accomplish extraordinary things, it's easy to focus on their intelligence, their talent, their connections, or their resources. But if you peel back the surface and study what actually sustains them through the long, brutal process of turning an impossible idea into reality, you'll find one quality above all others: resilience, the ability to keep going when every logical reason says to stop, to adapt when plans fail, to endure criticism, setbacks, and even ridicule without letting the flame die out. And that is the foundation of any meaningful transformation, whether in business, relationships, or personal reinvention. Resilience isn't glamorous. It's not the moment of launch or the applause at success. It's the months and years of silence when you're building something and nobody notices. It's the late nights when failure seems inevitable but you refuse to surrender. It's the inner dialogue that whispers, keep going, when the evidence screams, give up. Without resilience, intelligence collapses at the first setback, talent fades at the first rejection, ambition withers at the first disappointment. But with resilience, even ordinary people can achieve extraordinary results because they refuse to stop until the outcome is real. Most people misunderstand resilience. They think it's about brute force, about grinding endlessly without rest. But true resilience is about adaptability, about learning to bend without breaking, about treating setbacks not as signs to quit but as data, feedback, experiments showing what doesn't work so you can adjust and move forward. That's how rockets get built. You test, you fail, you learn, you iterate, and eventually you succeed, and life is no different. The people who thrive are not those who never fall, but those who learn to use every fall as momentum to rise stronger. What resilience demands most is perspective, the ability to zoom out from the pain of the moment and see it as one frame in a larger movie, because in the big picture, every struggle becomes part of the training that equips you for breakthroughs later, and without that long-term view, most people quit too early, abandoning their dreams in the exact moment before things were about to turn. Resilience also requires emotional control. When criticism comes, when failure hits, when doubt grows louder than your conviction, the natural response is panic or despair, but resilience means maintaining calm under chaos, not because you ignore reality, but because you understand that chaos is part of the process, and the person who can stay steady when everything shakes is the person who becomes unstoppable. Resilience is built, not gifted. You don't wake up one day with an unbreakable mindset. You forge it through every challenge you survive, through the practice of not quitting, through the repetition of getting back up when the world knocks you down. Every time you endure, you prove to yourself that you're stronger than you thought, and that evidence compounds until resilience becomes part of your identity. And here's the truth: resilience is contagious. When you embody it, the people around you, your family, your team, your community absorb it too. They draw strength from your ability to stand when others fall. And your resilience becomes a multiplier that doesn't just transform your life, but inspires others to face their storms with courage. Resilience is not about avoiding pain, it's about choosing what the pain means. You can let it define you as a victim or refine you as a creator. You can let it break you or build you. The choice is yours every single time, and the people who create extraordinary outcomes are those who consistently choose to let pain become fuel instead of poison. In my own journey, resilience was the difference between collapse and progress. There were times when companies were weeks away from bankruptcy, when rockets exploded on the launch pad, when critics declared failure inevitable, and in those moments, the only thing that kept us moving wasn't certainty, it was resilience. The decision to keep trying one more time, the refusal to let setbacks become the final word. That same principle applies to you. Whether you're rebuilding after loss, starting something new later in life, or chasing a dream that feels too ambitious, resilience is the tool that will carry you through the dark stretches when progress is invisible and hope feels thin. Resilience also connects directly to meaning. When your purpose is strong enough, you can endure almost anything, because resilience isn't about superhuman willpower, it's about alignment between what you want and why it matters. If your why is weak, every obstacle feels overwhelming, but if your why is strong, no obstacle feels permanent. That's why resilience isn't just about grit, it's about clarity, because clarity of purpose gives strength to endure. And perhaps the most liberating truth about resilience is this: you already have it. Every hardship you've survived, every crisis you've navigated, every morning you got up when life gave you reasons to stay down, all of that proves resilience isn't something you need to acquire, it's something you need to recognize and apply more deliberately. You've been building it your whole life. Now the challenge is to use it to build the future you want. Resilience is the foundation of transformation because without it, nothing lasts. But with it, even the most impossible dreams become inevitable. The question is not whether you will face storms, you will. The question is whether you will let those storms bury you or shape you into someone unshakable. Because at the end of the day, resilience is not about never breaking. It's about becoming the kind of person who rebuilds stronger every time. If there's one thing I've learned from building companies, from pushing boundaries in industries people thought were untouchable, it's this: reinvention is not optional, it's survival. And the same principle applies to you no matter your age, background, or circumstances, because the moment you stop adapting, you start decaying, and the courage to reinvent yourself is what separates people who fade quietly from those who create their most meaningful work when others assume their prime has passed. Reinvention doesn't mean abandoning who you are or erasing your past. It means taking the raw materials of everything you've lived through, your skills, your failures, your lessons, your passions, and configuring them into a new version of yourself that is more aligned, more authentic, and more powerful than before. Look at nature. Snakes shed their skin, caterpillars transform into butterflies, trees lose leaves only to grow stronger in the next season. Reinvention is not unnatural. It's the most natural process in existence. The only difference is that humans resist it because reinvention feels risky, it feels uncertain, it requires stepping into unknown territory when your instincts are screaming for safety. But here's the paradox: safety is the most dangerous place to live, because staying the same guarantees decline, while reinvention creates the possibility of expansion. The courage to reinvent is not about having all the answers, it's about having the willingness to question all the assumptions you've built your life on. Maybe you assumed that your career path was fixed, that you were destined to retire quietly after decades of work. Maybe you assumed your creativity had an expiration date, that passions you set aside in your 20s can't be pursued in your 60s. Maybe you assumed your role was only to serve others, not to step into the spotlight yourself. Reinvention begins the moment you challenge those assumptions and ask, what if that story is wrong? What if the future is not bound by the past? Every company I've built was an act of reinvention. Tesla wasn't born from following the rules of the auto industry. SpaceX wasn't born from mimicking NASA's playbook. They were born from asking, why not? Why can't electric cars be desirable? Why can't rockets be reusable? Reinvention always begins with the question, why not? And for you, the same question could unlock a new career, a new passion, a new identity, a new life chapter you never imagined possible. The courage part comes because reinvention demands leaving comfort zones. It might mean learning new skills when your peers are coasting, starting projects when others are retiring, risking failure when people expect you to play it safe. But what's the alternative? To live the rest of your life in quiet regret, knowing you could have tried? Fear of looking foolish keeps most people trapped. They don't reinvent because they're worried about opinions, about criticism, about starting at the bottom again. But here's the truth. No one cares as much as you think. People are too focused on their own lives. The critics disappear quickly, but the regret of not trying doesn't. Reinvention doesn't require massive leaps overnight. It can start small. Taking a class in something that excites you, volunteering in a space where your skills bring value, experimenting with new ways of expressing yourself. Every small act of reinvention plants seeds, and those seeds grow faster than you imagine once you nurture them. And remember, reinvention is not betrayal of your past, it is the fulfillment of it. Every chapter of your life prepared you for this. The caregiving, the working, the failing, the struggling, all of it was training, data, raw material. Reinvention is the process of finally using it in a new design. Think about technology. We don't throw out old code, we update it. We don't discard hardware, we upgrade it. You are not a finished product. You are a system capable of upgrades, patches, redesigns. Reinvention is your upgrade. One of the most powerful aspects of reinvention is identity shift. For years, you may have called yourself by one role: parent, spouse, employee, caretaker. Those roles served you, but they don't have to define you forever. You can shift your identity to creator, entrepreneur, artist, mentor, innovator. Identity is not fixed, it's chosen. Reinvention is choosing a new identity that excites you. But here's the catch. You can't wait until you feel ready, because you will never feel ready. Readiness is a myth. Courage comes before confidence. Action comes before certainty. Reinvention demands that you move forward while still feeling unprepared. That's how every meaningful transformation begins. And when you take those first steps, something incredible happens. Your energy returns, your curiosity reignites, your life feels alive again, because the human spirit was never designed for stagnation, it was designed for creation. The courage to reinvent yourself is not just about you, it's about the ripple effect you create. When you reinvent, you give permission to everyone around you to do the same. Your children, your friends, your community, they see that it's possible to start again, to grow again, to refuse the narrative that life is over after a certain age. You become a living example that reinvention is possible at any stage, and that may be the most powerful contribution you make, not just transforming your life, but inspiring others to transform theirs. Reinvention is not reserved for the young. In fact, the best reinventions often belong to those who've lived long enough to know what really matters, and who have the courage to finally align their life with it. The question you need to ask is simple. If not now, when? The years will pass whether you reinvent or not. The difference is whether you'll look back with pride at the risks you took, or with regret at the chances you avoided. The courage to reinvent yourself is the most important decision you can make now, because it transforms not only what you do, but who you are becoming, and who you are becoming will determine the legacy you leave behind.